63 years old. That is how long it took for the one person I gave everything to look me in the eye and hand me a prison sentence I did not earn. 2 years, 730 days. I counted every single one of them. Not because I was waiting to forgive, because I was waiting to walk out of those doors and remind my son that the man he threw away is still standing. Welcome to Daddy's Revenge. Pull up a seat. Turn the volume up. Because what I am about to tell you is the kind of story that will make your jaw drop and your chest tight at the same time. Before we get into it, drop a comment below and tell me if you believe family can ever really betray you. Hit subscribe because the people in these stories had choices, real choices, and they made the wrong ones every single time. My name is Raymond Earl Gaines. I am 63 years old. I spent 24 months inside the Caldwell State Correctional Facility in Caldwell, Georgia, for a crime that was never mine to carry. And on the morning of April 9th, 2024, they handed me back my belt, my watch, and what was left of my dignity. I walked out of those doors into the pale Georgia sun, and the first thing I noticed was the birds. You stop hearing birds when you're locked up. Not because they're not there. They are. But because your ears learn to filter out anything that does not carry a threat. Standing on that sidewalk outside Caldwell, listening to a mockingbird go completely wild in a pine tree about 30 feet away, I felt something crack open in my chest that I was not prepared for. Not grief, not anger, just the sheer weight of time returning all at once. I stood there for about a minute and just let it hit me. Then I heard a car horn. One short, polite tap. The kind of horn a man uses when he knows you need a moment, but the parking lot is only so big. I turned around. Parked along the curb in a white Chevy Silverado with a cracked side mirror that had been there since at least 2019 was Dennis Pratt. Dennis is 61, a retired railroad supervisor from Macon who's been my closest friend since we were both 17 years old working summer jobs at the same lumber yard outside of Augusta. The man drove 4 hours each way without being asked twice. I walked to the truck. He rolled down the window before I got there. He looked at me the way people look when they're checking if something is still whole after being dropped. I looked back at him the same way. Then he unlocked the door and I climbed in. He had the heat running even though it was not cold. He had a brown bag from Hardee's on the back seat and a large sweet tea with my name on a piece of masking tape stuck to the cup. Dennis Pratt did not do coffee. He had not touched coffee since 1998 when his doctor told him to stop. But he knew I did not drink sweet tea. That cup was for me. I held it in both hands and stared out the windshield at the Caldwell facility getting smaller in the passenger side mirror as Dennis pulled away from the curb. Neither of us said anything for about 2 miles. Dennis drove the way he did everything else, steady, no wasted motion, both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 like he was still operating heavy equipment. Then he said, "Marcus called the house." Just like that. No build-up, no warning. Just those 3 words landing flat in the cab of that truck. Marcus, my son, 34 years old. The reason I was sitting in that truck in the first place. I kept my eyes on the road. When? I asked. Yesterday morning, Dennis said. He was looking straight ahead. Said he wanted to know if I had heard from you yet. What did you tell him? I told him I had not. He was quiet for a second. Raymond, he said, and the way he said it, using my full name, told me something was coming that he had been holding for a while. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on Highway 129 stretching out ahead of us through the Georgia pines. Marcus is in a bad way, he said. And before I could say anything, he added, I am not asking you to care about that right now. I'm just telling you. I nodded once. That was fair. I was not ready to care about that. Not yet. What kind of bad way? I asked because even a man with every reason to let go still needs to understand the shape of the thing he is letting go of. Dennis exhaled. The restaurant chain is gone. All 4 locations. The SBA loan went into default last fall. The house on Fernwood Drive, the one he bought after the wedding, gone in February. Foreclosure. He paused. Cheryl left sometime around Thanksgiving. Took the kids to her mother's place in Savannah. I sat with that. The kids. My grandchildren. 2 girls, 7 and 9. I had not seen them since before the trial. That was the part that lived differently inside me than everything else. Marcus, I could build walls around. 2 years gives you a lot of practice building walls. But Amara and Lily, 7 and 9 years old, growing up with a grandfather they were probably told not to ask about. That one did not have a wall yet. Dennis must have sensed it, because he did something he almost never does. He reached over and put one hand on my shoulder for about 3 seconds. Then he put it back on the wheel. He did not say anything. He did not need to. There is a kind of friendship that does not require language. You either have it or you do not. Dennis Pratt and I have had it since we were teenagers with bad haircuts and no money and more confidence than sense. That friendship is the reason I walked out of Caldwell with a plan instead of just walking out with anger. Dennis had been working with someone while I was inside. Someone sharp. Someone patient. Someone who had spent the last 8 months building something I was about to pick up and carry the rest of the way. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a large brown envelope and dropped it on my lap. "Do not open it yet," he said. "Wait until we get to Patrice's." Patrice. Patrice Okafor. She was the someone. A forensic accountant and licensed paralegal who worked out of her own firm in Athens, Georgia. Dennis had found her through his daughter, who worked in contract law. Patrice had come highly recommended by 3 different attorneys, 2 of which had been on opposite sides of the same case, and both of them still called her the sharpest person in the room. I had spoken to her twice from the prison phone. 10 minutes each call. She did not waste words. Neither did I. We understood each other perfectly. I set the envelope on the dashboard and finished my sweet tea and watched Georgia roll past the windows. Spanish moss hanging from live oaks. Red clay shoulders on the county roads. The particular green of an April morning in the South that feels almost too alive, like it is trying to make a point about something. I had grown up here, raised Marcus here, buried his mother here 11 years ago in a small cemetery outside of Eaton under a pecan tree she had always loved. And this land, this specific Georgia morning, had watched me get taken apart in a courtroom by my own son's testimony. I needed to remember that when the morning started feeling too beautiful. Marcus Gaines had stood in a Hancock County courtroom in November of 2021 and told a judge and a jury that he had personally witnessed me shove his wife, Denise, down the back stairs of their home on Fernwood Drive during an argument. He said it caused a miscarriage she suffered 3 days later. He said I had been angry about something related to the family business. He said I had pushed her. He said it quietly. He said it convincingly. He said it looking directly at the jury and not once at me. And they believed him. Because why would a son lie about his own father? Because what motive could a man have to send his own father to prison? Because the prosecutor had medical records showing blunt trauma consistent with a fall. Because Denise, pale and shaking in that witness box, had told the same story with tears running down her face. Because I was a 61-year-old black man in a Hancock County courtroom with a public defender who was handling 11 other cases that month. That is why they believed him. I was sentenced to 2 to 4 years. I served 2. Today I was out. And today Marcus Gaines was going to start finding out exactly what I had been building while he thought I was finished. Patrice Okafor lived and worked out of a converted Victorian house on Mill Edge Avenue in Athens, a tall, narrow building painted the color of old moss with white trim and a porch full of ferns. It looked like the kind of place where serious things happened quietly, which was exactly right. She was waiting on the front steps when Dennis pulled the truck into the driveway. She stood up when she saw us. She was about 50, neat and unhurried, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a gray blazer over dark slacks. She extended a hand when I reached the porch. "Mr. Gaines, call me Raymond." She nodded once. "Come in." We sat in her front office around a round table covered in organized stacks of paper and 2 open laptops. Dennis stayed near the door. He had been here before. He knew the shape of this room. Patrice sat across from me and laced her fingers together on the table. "Before we open that envelope," she said, "I want to walk you through what we found and what we filed and what happens next. I want you to understand the full picture before you see the documents." I sat back in my chair and waited. I had learned patience the hard way. 2 years of it. Patrice was not the kind of woman you rushed. She turned one of the laptops toward me. "Raymond, your son Marcus inherited controlling interest in the Gaines Family Property Trust when your wife Gloria passed in 2013. You signed the transfer of management rights to him voluntarily when you started having knee issues and thought you were easing into retirement. Do you remember that?" I remembered. I thought I was trusting my son with something I had spent 30 years building. I said yes. She nodded. In the 18 months before your conviction, Marcus liquidated 3 of the 4 properties held in the trust. Not all at once. Slowly. Quietly. One in December 2020. One the following March. One in August 2021, 3 months before the trial. She tapped the screen. The proceeds, roughly $420,000 across the 3 sales, were moved through 2 business accounts and a personal LLC Marcus opened in Cheryl's name in 2019. She paused. They were supposed to go back into the trust. They did not. Raymond, Patrice said, I want to be very precise here. What I'm about to tell you is documented, sourced, and verified. I looked at her steadily. The 4th property, the commercial parcel on Oak Street in Milledgeville, the one your father left you in 1991, was never transferred out of the trust. It is still there, still intact, still in your name as the original grantor. Marcus apparently did not touch it. Maybe he forgot it existed. Maybe he thought it was worthless. She folded her hands. It is not worthless. I sat forward. How much? She held my gaze. Current appraised value is $380,000. I let that number sit in the room for a second. Dennis made a sound near the door that was not quite a word. Patrice kept her eyes on me. As grantor of the trust, you retain the right to petition for management reclamation in the event of fiduciary breach. She slid a document across the table toward me. I filed that petition with the Hancock County Probate Court on your behalf 8 days ago. She tapped the page. Marcus does not know yet, but he is about to. There was a civil judgment filed against him personally last month. A creditor named Gerald Foss out of Atlanta. Private business loan, $260,000. 18 months overdue. Foss has a hearing in 9 days. She looked at me over her glasses. If that judgment lands, it attaches to any asset Marcus controls or has a legitimate claim to. But it cannot touch assets held in a trust where he no longer has management authority. Which means the Oak Street property. Which means that once my reclamation petition clears, that parcel is back under my control. Entirely. And entirely beyond the reach of Gerald Foss or anyone else who has been waiting for Marcus to come up for air. Patrice said it plainly. Your son tried to use a prison sentence to buy himself time. He needed you out of the picture long enough to finish what he was doing with the trust assets. She closed the laptop halfway. What he did not account for is that the one property he left untouched is the one that changes everything. I looked down at the petition on the table. Clean. Professional. Every line where it needed to be. I thought about the Oak Street parcel. I had been there last in 2019. A solid brick commercial building my father had bought in 1986 and maintained like it was a member of the family. Good bones. Raymond, Patrice said, there is something else. She turned to the second laptop and pulled up what looked like a medical document. I got this through a colleague in Milledgeville. It is from Hancock Regional Hospital. She slid the laptop slowly toward me. Denise's admission record from November 3rd, 2021, 4 days before the trial. She had been treated for a dislocated shoulder consistent with a forward fall. The attending physician's notes include a flag notation. She looked at me carefully. The notation reads, patient hesitant to discuss circumstances of injury. Possible domestic concern. I read the line twice. Patient hesitant to discuss circumstances of injury. Denise had never hesitated in that courtroom. She had been sharp, certain, tearful in exactly the right places. She had pointed at me like she had been doing it her whole life. And here, 4 days before she took that witness stand, a doctor had written down that she seemed afraid to talk about how she had actually been hurt. Dennis had moved away from the door. He was standing behind my left shoulder now, very still. I looked at the notation one more time. Then I looked at Patrice. Does she know you have this? Patrice shook her head. Not yet. Does Marcus know it exists? I cannot say for certain. But based on the timeline, she said, the injury occurred the same week Marcus was negotiating the last property sale. She tapped the table once. There was a lot of pressure in that household that week. I nodded slowly. The room was very quiet except for the hum of a ceiling fan and the sound of traffic somewhere on Mill Edge Avenue, going about a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning. I thought about Denise. I had never disliked her. She had married my son. She had given me 2 grandchildren. She had also stood in a courtroom and said things about me that were not true. And now I was sitting here looking at a document that suggested she might have done it terrified. That did not make what she did right, but made it more complicated than rage. And I was 63 years old and too tired for uncomplicated rage. Dennis put a hand briefly on my shoulder again. Patrice was watching me. "What do you want to do, Raymond?" she said. I looked at the petition. I looked at the hospital notation. I looked at the appraised value on the Oak Street document. Then I looked at Patrice, and I said, "We file everything we have." She nodded once. That was the right answer. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document in detail. Patrice walked me through the reclamation petition line by line. She walked me through the timeline of the trust asset liquidations, each one laid out in sequence like a map of my son's slow, quiet unraveling of something I had spent decades building. Dennis sat at the table with us by the second hour. He had questions that were good questions. Patrice answered every one of them without impatience. Around noon, Kyle's daughter dropped off sandwiches from a deli downtown. We ate around the table like people do when work is serious enough to make hunger feel rude, but necessary enough to make stopping feel irresponsible. Patrice ate half a sandwich and kept working. That impressed me. A woman who stays focused through a turkey club is a woman you want on your side. At 12:40, Patrice's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. "Raymond, I know that tone. Somebody is here," she said. I looked at Dennis. He had already pushed back from the table. Marcus Gaines was parked outside on Mill Edge Avenue in a gray Honda Accord that still had a cracked bumper from a parking lot incident he had mentioned to me once, years ago, as a small complaint about Athens traffic. He was sitting in the driver's seat, not moving, just sitting there, staring at the front of the house. Patrice's assistant, a quiet young man named Theo, had spotted the car during a lunch run and recognized the plates from a document in the file. I stood at the front window and looked out at that Accord and felt the particular stillness of a man who is prepared for exactly this and is now watching it arrive. Dennis stood beside me. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Same thing he asked me in the truck. Same patient voice. "Let him come in," I said. Dennis did not look surprised. Patrice adjusted her glasses and straightened her legal pad and said nothing. Theo went to the door. Marcus Gaines looked worse than I had imagined when he walked up that porch. He was thinner than I remembered, wearing a blue button-down shirt that was slightly too big for him now, like he had bought it when he was a different size and had not bothered to replace it. His face had the specific tiredness that comes from more than one kind of loss. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me. We looked at each other across about 15 feet of Patrice Okafor's front office. My son, 34 years old. The boy I taught to read in the kitchen of our house in Eatonton on Sunday mornings with the radio on low. The boy who used to fall asleep in the car on long drives and wake up confused and a little embarrassed about it until he was old enough not to care anymore. The boy who had stood in a courtroom and told a story that sent me away. "Dad," that was all he said. Just that one word. The way he said it, worn down to almost nothing, did something in my chest. I did not let it reach my face. I looked at him steadily. Marcus. Not son. Not boy. Marcus. Full name. He registered it. I watched it land. He looked at Dennis, who looked back at him with a quiet, unmoved expression of a man who drove 4 hours each way and has made his choice about where he stands. He looked at Patrice, who was seated at the table with her pen in her hand and her legal pad open in front of her, looking at him the way professionals look at situations they have already accounted for. Then he looked back at me. "Can we talk?" he said. "Sit down," I said. He sat. He did not take his jacket off. That told me he had not decided if he was staying. That was fine. Patrice and I had plenty to say regardless. Marcus laced his fingers on the table and looked at them. Then he looked up at me. "I heard you were out," he said. "I figured you might come here." I looked at him. "How did you know to come here?" He was quiet for a second. I have been watching Patrice's firm for a few months. I did not know what exactly she was working on, but I knew she was connected to Dennis, and I knew Dennis was connected to you. He paused. "I needed to find out what you knew." That was my son, even sitting in a chair in a room where the walls were already closing, still thinking strategically, still managing information, still calculating. Some habits do not break just because everything else does. I looked at Patrice. She turned the second laptop toward Marcus without a word. He looked at the screen. He went still. He looked at the hospital notation. Then he looked at the trust liquidation timeline. Then he looked at the Oak Street appraisal. He looked at that one the longest. When he looked up, his face was different. The calculation was gone. What was under it was just tired. "Dad," he said. I started to speak. He held up one hand. "Please." I stopped. Let him have the moment. He had earned it in the wrong direction, but he had earned a moment. "I made some very bad decisions," he said. He said it slowly, like each word was heavier than the one before it. I was drowning. The restaurants were failing. I had borrowed money I should not have borrowed from people I should not have trusted. Cheryl was threatening to leave. I was using the trust properties to try to keep everything from collapsing at once. He paused. I panicked. I looked at him, and when that was not enough, I said quietly, "You needed someone to blame for Denise's miscarriage." His jaw tightened. "The baby," he said, "the baby was real." "I know that," I said. "I'm not arguing about the baby. I'm asking you about the choice you made afterward. Who hurt Denise, Marcus?" The room held that question like a room holds smoke. He looked at the table. He did not answer. I said it again, clearly, without raising my voice. "Who hurt Denise, Marcus?" He closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened them. I did not mean for it to happen the way it happened. I was not going to let him soften it with passive language. "You pushed her." His hands were flat on the table now. There was a fight. Things got bad. I did not mean for her to fall. And then afterward, he said, he stopped and swallowed. Afterward, I was so scared. I was so terrified of everything collapsing that I looked for a way out of it. I looked for someone to put it on. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. "And I chose you." The silence in that room was total. Patrice's pen was still. Dennis had not moved. I sat across from my son, and I let that silence do what silence is supposed to do. I did not fill it with forgiveness. I did not fill it with rage. I just let it sit there between us, and I let him feel the full weight of what he had just admitted out loud for the first time in his life. Then I said, "I'm not signing anything today, Marcus." He looked up. "I know that is what you came here for." He did not deny it. "I am not signing anything. I'm not releasing anything. I'm not doing anything that protects your remaining assets from Gerald Foss or anyone else waiting in line for what is left of your decisions." He nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "Then why are you here?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Because Amara asked about you," he said quietly. "My 7-year-old granddaughter. She asked her father about me." I kept my face completely still. "What did she ask?" "She asked if Grandpa was ever coming back." He set it to the table. "She drew a picture of the house in Eton, the one you used to live in. She gave it to Cheryl and told her to send it to Grandpa, so he would have something to look at." He reached into his jacket pocket, and he placed a folded piece of construction paper on the table and slid it toward me. I did not touch it. I looked at it. Orange and yellow crayons. The shape of a house. A tree next to it that was probably meant to be the pecan tree in the front yard. A stick figure in front of it that was taller than the tree. The way children draw adults, confident about importance even when the proportions are wrong. I looked at that drawing for a long time. Then I looked at Marcus. "She does not know anything," he said. "I never told them anything bad about you." "That I believe," I said, "because if you had, Amara would not be drawing pictures of my house." He had nothing to say to that. I stood up. Marcus stood up too. "I'm going to be straight with you," I said. "The reclamation petition for the Oak Street property was filed 8 days ago. Patrice is filing 2 supplementary documents tomorrow morning. By the time Gerald Foss's hearing happens in 9 days, the only asset you have left that could have protected you will be legally mine." He did not react the way I expected. He did not argue. He did not plead. He just nodded once, like a man who had known it was coming and had decided on the drive over that he was going to stand in it. I respected that slightly. Only slightly. "Marcus," I said, "I'm not doing this to destroy you." I looked at him carefully. "I am doing this because 2 years of my life were taken in exchange for your decisions, and the least the universe is owed is an accounting." He nodded again. "When does the petition clear?" he asked. Patrice said, 7 to 10 business days from original filing. He calculated that silently. He understood the timeline. He understood what it meant for the Foss hearing. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Is there anything," he started. I let him finish the thought. "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about that. Not about mercy. About something more complicated than mercy. I looked at the drawing of the house, still on the table. I want Amara and Lily to know their grandfather, I said. That is the only thing I want from you right now that has nothing to do with a courtroom. He breathed in and held it. Okay, he said. Then he walked out of Patrice's office and down the front porch steps and back to that gray Accord with a cracked bumper. Dennis and I watched him pull away from the window. That is your blood, Dennis said. I know what he is, I said. Dennis nodded. He did not push further. He never pushed further. That was the last time I spoke to Marcus Gaines for 9 days. 9 days of ordinary hours and deliberate silence while the machinery moved in the background the way good machinery does, quietly, without announcement. I stayed at Dennis's house on Westover Drive in Macon. I helped him repaint his back fence on the 3rd day because I needed to do something with my hands and because it had clearly needed painting for a while and Dennis was too stubborn to admit it. On the 5th day, I drove to my storage unit outside of Eton, the one I had been paying $60 a month on for 11 years, and I opened it for the first time since before the arrest. Everything was exactly where I had left it. My tools. 3 boxes of Gloria's things I had never been able to go through. My father's old chess set in a wooden case. A box of tax records going back to 1994. I stood in the doorway of that storage unit in the April afternoon, and I thought about the Oak Street building and what good bones look like when someone has been patient enough to leave them alone. On the 7th day, Patrice called me. Raymond, she said, the supplementary filings have been accepted. Everything is on track. The reclamation should confirm before the Foss hearing. She paused. Marcus's attorney called my office this morning. I asked what they said. They asked whether there was any flexibility in the timeline. Patrice was quiet for a beat. I told them there was not. Good, I said. On the morning of the 9th day, a Tuesday, Patrice called again. It is done, she said. Confirmed and recorded. The Oak Street property is yours, Raymond. Deed transferred this morning at 9:22. I was standing on Dennis's back porch with a cup of coffee watching a squirrel argue with a bird feeder, and I said thank you, Patrice, and I meant it in more ways than I had words for. She said the Foss hearing was the next morning. I asked if I should be there. She said it was up to me. I thought about it for a moment. About sitting in another Georgia courtroom, watching another proceeding sort through the pieces of something broken. I thought about whether I needed to be in that room to feel the thing being finished. I decided I did not. Dennis made eggs. We ate on the porch. I found out what happened through Patrice's contact at the courthouse. Marcus Gaines walked into the Hancock County Civil Court the following morning with an attorney he had stretched thin to afford and a strategy built entirely on the Oak Street equity as his primary negotiating instrument against Gerald Foss's judgment. The attorney presented the asset. The court pulled the current deed record. The Oak Street property, Milledgeville, Georgia, was registered to one Raymond Earl Gaines. Effective the previous Tuesday, Marcus went still. His attorney asked for a recess. The recess was granted. During the recess, Marcus tried to call me 4 times. I was at a diner on Riverside Drive in Macon eating peach cobbler because I had not had good peach cobbler in 2 years, and this was not a morning to be without it. I watched his name appear on my phone screen 4 times, and I let it ring. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. There was no pleasure in that ringing phone. There was only the settled quiet of a man who has done what the situation required and is sitting across from a plate of peach cobbler on a Tuesday morning in Georgia and has nothing left to prove to anyone. Without the Oak Street equity, Marcus had nothing to negotiate with. Gerald Foss's judgment landed in full. Every personal asset Marcus Gaines held subject to the judgment. The Accord, the business accounts, what was left in his personal savings. The rental in Athens, his residence, was protected below the homestead threshold, same as Georgia law intends. But everything else gone. He walked out of that courtroom with a judgment he could not meet, an attorney he could not pay, and 4 unanswered phone calls. Alone in a way that has nothing to do with the number of people in the room. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, I drove to Milledgeville for the first time in over 2 years. I parked on Oak Street in front of my father's building. Sat there for a moment. It was a solid 2-story brick commercial building. Wide windows on the ground floor. Good roof line. A hardware store had operated out of the ground floor until 2018, and the space had been vacant since, but the structure was clean. My father had maintained it like a point of personal honor, and whoever had been managing the property since had at least had the sense not to let it fall apart. I got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk and looked at it in the Friday afternoon light. My grandfather had been a bricklayer. My father had watched buildings go up his whole life and saved until he could own one. Now it was mine again. I thought about what a building like this could become in the right hands with the right plan and the right kind of patience. I thought about electrical work and fair labor and what it feels like to build something that has your family's name in the deed and your family's intention and structure. I did not go inside that day. I just stood there long enough to understand what I was holding. Then I walked back to the car. On the passenger seat was a single envelope. Inside it was a letter, 2 paragraphs, my signature at the bottom. I had asked Dennis to drop it at Marcus's rental the evening before. The letter said 2 things. The first was that I had no intention of using the hospital notation publicly. That what that document contained was between Marcus and Denise and whatever remained between them. And that I was not in the business of using a frightened woman's medical record as a weapon in a war I had already won. The second was that the Oak Street property was mine, and I intended to do something real with it. And that if Marcus wanted to have a conversation, a real one, without attorneys and without agendas and without anything that needed signing, he knew how to reach Dennis Pratt and Macon. Not forgiveness, not invitation back into my life as though nothing had happened. Just a door left slightly open, the way you leave a window cracked on a cool night. Not because the room needs it, but because sealing everything shut takes its own kind of toll. Whether he ever walked through it was entirely his problem to figure out. I drove back toward Macon on 441, the long way through the old county roads where the pines get close to the road and the light comes through in long slanted pieces the color of good wood. I had my window down, and the April air was doing that thing Georgia air does in the spring, warm on the surface with something cool underneath it, like the ground was still holding the memory of winter and had not quite let it go. I did not think about Marcus Gaines for most of that drive. I thought about Amara and Lily, 7 and 9, growing up in Savannah with their mother. I thought about the drawings still sitting in my jacket pocket, the orange and yellow house, the oversized stick figure in front of the pecan tree, the particular confidence of a child who does not yet know that some doors stay closed. I had called Cheryl the day after Marcus left Patrice's office. She had picked up on the second ring, which told me something. We talked for about 20 minutes. She was careful, and I was careful, and somewhere in the middle of that careful conversation, she said, "The girls miss you, Raymond." And I said, "I know." And there was a silence that was not unfriendly. She said she would bring them up from Savannah in May, that I could take them to the Eden house, the storage unit was still mine, and if I wanted to open those boxes from Gloria's things, that was a thing a grandfather could do with his grandchildren nearby, if he wanted, if he was ready. I said maybe, which was the most honest thing I could offer. A maybe that had warmth in it. That was more than I had had in 2 years. I turned onto the highway and let Macon come toward me through the windshield, flat and familiar in mine. I thought about Dennis in his kitchen right now, probably watching some game and pretending he had not spent 9 days worrying about me every hour. I thought about Patrice and her legal pad and her 2 uncapped highlighters and the particular precision of a woman who does not waste a single word or a single motion. I thought about my father's building on Oak Street and what it could be, not what it was, not what it almost became, what still could be, in the hands of a man who knows how to read a structure, who knows what good bones look like, who has learned the hard way that the best things you build require patience that most people are not willing to hold. I was 63 years old. I had 2 years of my life taken from me by the one person I had trusted with everything I had built. I had walked out of Caldwell Correctional Facility on a Thursday morning with $60 and a sweet tea with my name on a piece of masking tape, and the slow certain knowledge that I was not finished. I pulled into Dennis's driveway as the last of the Friday afternoon light was going gold across the yard. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment. Then I reached in my pocket and I took out Amara's drawing and I unfolded it carefully and I looked at it one more time. The orange house, the yellow tree, the tall stick figure standing in front of it, proportions wrong in the way that children get things wrong, which is to say not wrong at all, just honest. I folded it back up and put it in the glove box. Then I got out of the car and walked up to Dennis's front door and knocked twice, the way I always did, just to let him know I was back. He opened it before I finished knocking. He looked at me the same way he had in that prison parking lot, checking that I was still whole, still standing. I was. If this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe to Daddy's Revenge for more real, raw, and honest stories about family, betrayal, and what it means to still be standing.